There's a pattern that has destroyed every major empire in history. Not conquest, not invasion, not revolution. Economic collapse. Specifically, currency collapse. And it happens the exact same way every single time. Rome, the empire that ruled the known world for 5 centuries, collapsed when its currency became worthless. Spain, which controlled more gold and silver than any nation in history, went bankrupt repeatedly until its empire dissolved. Britain, which dominated global trade for 200 years, lost its empire within a decade after its currency collapsed. 4 times in recorded history, a dominant empire has followed this exact pattern. Military overextension, unsustainable spending, currency debasement or money printing, inflation, loss of confidence, collapse. And every time, the people in power believed they were different, that their empire was special, that the old rules didn't apply to them. They were wrong, every single time. And right now in 2025, the United States is following that exact same pattern. Step by step, warning sign by warning sign. The only question is whether we're near the beginning, the middle, or the end. This is the story of how empires destroy themselves through their own currency. How it happened to Rome, Spain, and Britain, and why every warning sign says it's happening again. Let's start with Rome, the empire that dominated Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East for over 500 years. At its peak, Rome controlled 60 million people across 3 continents. Its military was unmatched. Its infrastructure was the most advanced on Earth. Its currency, the denarius, was trusted everywhere, from Britain to Egypt. The denarius was a silver coin introduced in 211 BC. It contained about 4.5 grams of pure silver. For centuries, it held its value because the Roman government maintained its purity. When you received a denarius, you knew exactly what you were getting. Pure silver, real value. This created trust, and trust allowed Rome to fund its expansion, pay its soldiers, and build its infrastructure. But empires are expensive. Every generation, Rome's borders expanded. Every expansion required more soldiers, more forts, more roads, more administration. And eventually, more money than Rome actually had. So they did what every empire does when it spends more than it earns. They debased the currency. Emperor Nero, ruling from 54 to 68 AD, was the first to significantly reduce the silver content of the denarius. He needed to fund his lavish lifestyle and expensive military campaigns, so he ordered the mints to reduce the silver content from 100% to 90%. That extra 10%, pure profit for the emperor. He could mint 11 coins with the silver that used to make 10, more coins in circulation. Same amount of silver, that's inflation. But 90% silver was still substantial. The real destruction came later. By the time Emperor Caracalla ruled in 211 AD, the denarius was down to 50% silver, half real value, half base metal. By 265 AD, under Emperor Gallienus, it had fallen to just 5% silver. A coin that was once pure silver was now 95% worthless metal with a thin silver coating. Think about what that means. If you were a Roman soldier in 265 AD receiving your pay in denarii, you were being paid in coins worth 1/20th of what soldiers earned 2 centuries earlier. The government told you nothing had changed. The coin still said denarius. They still had the emperor's face, but the purchasing power had collapsed. Prices exploded. What cost 1 denarius in 200 AD cost 50 denarii by 300 AD. Farmers stopped selling food for coins and demanded barter instead. Soldiers refused to fight unless paid in gold or goods. Tax collectors couldn't collect taxes because the currency was worthless. The entire economic system seized up. And here's the key. This wasn't caused by foreign invasion. Rome's borders were still defended. This wasn't caused by plague or natural disaster. This was self-inflicted. The Roman government destroyed its own currency to fund spending it couldn't afford. And when the currency died, the empire died with it. By 476 AD, the Western Roman Empire officially collapsed. Not because Germanic tribes were stronger, but because Rome couldn't pay its armies anymore, couldn't fund its administration, couldn't maintain its infrastructure. The currency had been debased into irrelevance, and everything built on that currency collapsed. The pattern: military expansion, unsustainable spending, currency debasement, inflation, loss of economic function, collapse. Rome proved the pattern, and every empire since has repeated it. Now let's jump forward 12 centuries. Spain, 1500s. The Spanish Empire is just beginning its golden age. Christopher Columbus has opened the New World. Hernán Cortés has conquered the Aztecs. Francisco Pizarro has conquered the Incas. And Spain now controls the richest territories on Earth. In 1545, Spanish explorers discovered the Cerro Rico mountain in Potosi, in what is now Bolivia. This isn't just a silver mine, it's the largest silver deposit ever discovered. For the next century, Potosi will produce nearly half of the world's silver, millions of pounds of it, Ships loaded with silver crossed the Atlantic, filling Spanish coffers with wealth beyond imagination. Spain mints this silver into coins. The Spanish dollar becomes the first true global currency. It's used from Europe to Asia. It's trusted, it's pure, and there's an endless supply of it. Spain becomes the richest, most powerful empire on earth. At its peak, the Spanish Empire controls territories on every inhabited continent. The sun never sets on Spanish holdings. And then, exactly like Rome, they destroy themselves. Because there's a paradox with money. More money doesn't make you richer if everyone has more money. When Spain floods Europe with silver, prices rise. What cost one silver coin in 1500 costs 10 coins by 1600. The silver hasn't become less pure. There's just vastly more of it. That's inflation. Spain is importing so much silver that it's destroying the value of silver itself. And worse, Spain isn't producing anything. They're not building industries. They're not innovating. They're just extracting wealth from the colonies and spending it on wars, palaces, and luxury goods imported from other countries. The silver flows in from the Americas and flows right back out to France, England, and the Netherlands. To pay for goods, Spain doesn't produce itself. By the late 1500s, Spain's kings are drowning in debt. King Philip II, ruling from 1556 to 1598, inherits massive debt from his father, Charles the 36 million ducats in debt. And rather than cut spending, Philip borrows more. He fights wars on multiple fronts against the Ottoman Empire, against Protestant rebels in the Netherlands, against England, and when the debt becomes unpayable, he defaults. In 1557, Philip II declares bankruptcy and suspends all debt payments. This is the first sovereign default in modern history, but it's not the last. Spain defaults again in 1560, again in 1575, again in 1596, 4 defaults in 40 years. Despite controlling half the world's silver production, Spain can't pay its debts. Each default destroys trust. Lenders refuse to lend to Spain. Interest rates on Spanish debt skyrocket. And the government responds by debasing the currency. They start minting coins with less silver. They introduce copper coins that are supposed to be worth as much as silver coins. Nobody believes it. The currency loses credibility. By the 1600s, Spain is in terminal decline. The military can't be funded. The colonies begin to break away. And when the 30 Years' War ends in 1648, Spain signs the Peace of Westphalia, which marks the beginning of the end. By 1700, the Spanish Empire is essentially over. The country that once controlled the world's wealth had spent and borrowed itself into irrelevance. The pattern again: massive wealth influx, government overspending, excessive borrowing, currency inflation, repeated defaults, loss of confidence, collapse. Spain proved that even endless resources can't save an empire from fiscal mismanagement. Now we come to Britain, the empire that lasted longer, stretched further, and controlled more wealth than Rome or Spain combined. At its peak in 1922, the British Empire governed 458 million people, 1/4 of the world's population, 1/4 of the world's land. The sun never set on the British Empire, not because they controlled every time zone, but because they controlled so much territory that it was always daytime somewhere under British rule. And the British pound sterling was the foundation of it all. For over 2 centuries, the pound was the world's reserve currency. Over 60% of global trade was invoiced in pounds. The gold standard anchored everything. 1 pound sterling could be exchanged for a fixed amount of gold. This created trust, stability, and power. But empires are built on credit, and credit has to be repaid. Britain funded its empire through borrowing, government bonds, debt to finance wars, colonies, infrastructure, administration. As long as the pound held its value, this worked. But then came World War I. In 1914, Britain's national debt was $650 million. By 1919, after 4 years of total war, it had exploded to over $7 billion. That's a 10-fold increase in 5 years. To fund the war, Britain had borrowed from everyone, from its own citizens, from the United States, from anyone who would lend. But the war also forced Britain off the gold standard. In 1914, when war broke out, the government suspended gold convertibility. They had to print money to fund the war effort, and they couldn't maintain gold backing while doing it. The pound became a fiat currency, backed by nothing but the government's promise. After the war, Britain tried to return to gold. In 1925, Winston Churchill, then Chancellor of the Exchequer, put Britain back on the gold standard at the pre-war exchange rate. This was a catastrophic mistake. The pound was overvalued. British exports became uncompetitive. Unemployment soared, and the government had to maintain high interest rates to defend the currency, which crushed economic growth. By 1931, Britain was forced off gold again, permanently this time. The pound was devalued, and trust in British currency began to erode. But the real destruction came after World War II, Britain entered World War II already deeply in debt. The war cost everything. By 1945, Britain's national debt had reached 270% of GDP. The empire had bankrupted itself to win the war. Entire cities were in ruins. The economy was shattered. And Britain owed massive debts to the United States. In 1944, while the war was still raging, the Bretton Woods Conference redesigned the global financial system. The British pound was officially replaced as the world's primary reserve currency. The US dollar took its place. Britain fought desperately to preserve the pound's status, but it was over. They had the debt, but not the gold or the economy, to back their currency anymore. What followed was a slow, humiliating decline. In 1947, Britain tried to make the pound convertible again. The experiment lasted 6 weeks before a run on the currency forced them to reimpose controls. In 1949, the pound was devalued by 30%. In 1967, it was devalued again. Each devaluation destroyed savings, crushed confidence, and signaled to the world that Britain was no longer a first-rate power. Meanwhile, the empire disintegrated. India gained independence in 1947. Egypt nationalized the Suez Canal in 1956, and Britain's military response was a humiliating failure. Colony after colony broke away, not because they were conquered by outside forces, but because Britain could no longer afford to maintain them. By the 1970s, Britain was on the verge of becoming a failed state. Inflation hit 25%. The government went begging to the IMF for a bailout. The pound, which had once been the world's reserve currency, was now a symbol of decline. The empire that controlled a quarter of the earth had lost it all within 30 years, not through military defeat, through currency collapse and debt. The pattern once more: war debt, currency debasement, loss of reserve status, devaluation, inflation, imperial collapse. Britain proved that even the strongest empire can fall within a single generation when its currency fails. Which brings us to now, the United States, the current empire, the current reserve currency. And every single warning sign that destroyed Rome, Spain, and Britain is flashing red. Let's start with the currency. The US dollar has been the world's reserve currency since 1944. After World War II, the Bretton Woods system made the dollar the global standard. It was backed by gold, $35 per ounce. Other nations pegged their currencies to the dollar, and the dollar was as good as gold, literally. But just like Rome, just like Britain, the United States started spending more than it had. The Vietnam War, the Great Society programs, military bases around the world. By the 1960s, foreign governments noticed that America was printing more dollars than it had gold to back them. France, under Charles de Gaulle, started demanding gold in exchange for dollars. Other nations followed. The gold was leaving Fort Knox. The bluff was being called. In 1971, President Nixon closed the gold window. No more gold backing. The dollar became a pure fiat currency, just like the debased Roman denarius, just like the pound after 1931, backed by nothing but trust and the government's promise. At first, it seemed fine. The petrodollar system, established in the 1970s, created artificial demand for dollars because oil was priced in dollars globally. But the spending never stopped. The debt kept growing. In 1980, U.S. national debt was $900 billion. By 2000, it was $5.6 trillion. By 2020, it was $27 trillion. Today, in 2025, it's over $36 trillion. That's a 40-fold increase in 45 years. And it's accelerating. But the debt is only part of the story. Like Rome debasing the denarius, like Spain flooding the world with silver, the United States is printing money. Since 2008, the Federal Reserve has created trillions of dollars from nothing, quantitative easing they call it, necessary to stabilize the economy. During COVID, they printed over $4 trillion in 2 years, more money created than in the previous century combined. And just like every empire before, they told us it wouldn't cause inflation, that modern economics had solved the old problems, that we were different. We're not. Inflation hit 9% in 2022. Real inflation, the prices you actually pay for food, housing, healthcare, is far higher. The dollar is being debased, slowly at first. But the pattern always accelerates. And just like Britain, the United States is losing reserve currency status. In 2000, over 70% of global reserves were held in dollars. Today, it's 58% and falling. The BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and new members, are actively building alternatives. They're trading in local currencies, creating new payment systems, reducing dollar dependence. China and Russia are buying gold aggressively. Central banks worldwide are diversifying out of dollars. The world is preparing for the dollar to lose its dominance, just like they prepared for the pound to fall. The pattern is unmistakable. And here's the most dangerous part. The United States has the same problem Rome had: military overextension. The U.S. maintains nearly 800 military bases in over 70 countries. The defense budget is over $800 billion annually. Wars in Iraq and Afghanistan cost over $8 trillion. The empire is expensive. And it's being funded with debt and printed money. Just like Rome couldn't pay its legions in debased coins. Just like Spain couldn't fund its military after repeated defaults. Just like Britain couldn't maintain its empire after currency collapse. The United States is running out of time. So let's identify the pattern. Because once you see it, you can't unsee it. Every empire that has collapsed economically followed the same sequence. Not similar, identical. Stage 1, dominance. The empire is at its peak. Military strength, economic power, currency trust. Rome with the denarius, Spain with the dollar, Britain with the pound, America with the dollar. At this stage, the currency is backed by something real. Gold, silver, trust built over generations. The empire seems invincible. Stage 2, overextension. The empire expands beyond its means. More territory, more military commitments, more promises to citizens. Rome expanded across 3 continents. Spain tried to control every ocean. Britain colonized a quarter of the world. America maintains bases on every continent. The costs become unsustainable. Stage 3, deficit spending. The empire spends more than it earns. At first, this is manageable. They borrow, they issue bonds, they promise to repay, but the deficits become structural, permanent. Rome needed to pay its legions. Spain needed to fund its wars. Britain needed to finance 2 world wars. America runs trillion-dollar deficits annually, even during growth. Stage 4, currency debasement. The empire can't borrow enough, can't tax enough, so they debase the currency. Rome reduced silver in the denarius. Spain flooded the market with silver, causing inflation. Britain abandoned gold and devalued the pound twice. America left gold in 1971 and has been printing ever since. Stage 5, inflation. More currency with the same amount of real goods means prices rise. Rome saw prices increase 50-fold. Spain experienced price inflation across Europe. Britain saw 25% inflation in the 1970s. America is experiencing inflation now, despite government claims it's transitory. Stage 6, loss of confidence. The domestic population and foreign nations lose trust in the currency. Roman soldiers demanded payment in gold, not denarii. Spanish creditors refused to lend after multiple defaults. The world shifted from pounds to dollars at Bretton Woods. Today, nations are shifting away from the dollar. Stage 7, collapse. The economic system fails. The currency becomes worthless or loses its dominance. The empire can't fund its military, can't maintain control. Rome fell to Germanic tribes it could no longer pay to fight. Spain declined into irrelevance. Britain lost its empire within decades. And the US? That's the question we're living through right now. That's the pattern. 7 stages, repeated 4 times across 2,000 years. Different empires, different continents, different currencies, but the exact same sequence. Because the math doesn't change. You cannot spend more than you earn forever. You cannot print prosperity, and you cannot debase your currency without consequences. The pattern is absolute, and we're in stage 5, heading rapidly toward stage 6. So what happens next? History gives us 3 possible outcomes. First, controlled decline. Britain, after 1945, they lost the empire, lost reserve currency status, experienced painful devaluation and inflation. But the country didn't disappear. It adjusted to being a second-tier power. A slow, humiliating decline, but not total collapse. Second, chaotic collapse. Rome in the 5th century. The currency becomes worthless. The government loses control. The empire fragments. Dark ages follow. This is the worst-case scenario. Complete systemic breakdown. Not just economic, but social and political. Third, reset and restructure. A new currency system is established, maybe backed by gold again, maybe a new reserve currency emerges, China's yuan, a basket of currencies. Digital currencies. The old system dies, but something new replaces it relatively quickly. Painful, but survivable. The United States is at the crossroads. The debt cannot be repaid, not at current levels, not with current spending. The only options are default, inflation, or restructuring. Default would destroy dollar hegemony instantly. Inflation is already happening and will likely accelerate. Restructuring requires political will that doesn't currently exist. And here's what makes this different from Rome, Spain, or Britain. Those were regional empires. The US dollar is the global reserve currency. When the Roman denarius collapsed, it affected the Roman Empire. When the dollar collapses, it affects the entire world. Every central bank, every trade agreement, every financial market. The interconnected global economy amplifies both the impact and the chaos. But the pattern says it's coming. Not because of prediction, because of precedent. 4 empires, 4 currency collapses, 4 identical sequences. The math of empire is unforgiving. You can delay it, you can deny it, but you cannot avoid it. Rome debased its currency to pay its legions. The denarius died, the empire fell. Spain flooded the world with silver. Inflation destroyed its wealth. The empire declined. Britain borrowed to fight 2 world wars. The pound collapsed. The empire dissolved. And now the United States prints trillions, runs endless deficits, and believes it's different. It's not different. The pattern doesn't care about American exceptionalism. It doesn't care about military strength or technological advancement. The pattern is economic, and economic laws are as absolute as physical laws. You cannot print wealth, you cannot borrow forever, and you cannot debase your currency without destroying your empire. 4 empires, 4 collapses, 4 identical patterns. The only question left is timing. How long until stage 6? How long until the world loses confidence in the dollar? How long until the American empire follows Rome, Spain, and Britain into the history books? The pattern says we're close. The debt says we're close. The money printing says we're close. And history, which has watched this exact sequence destroy 4 empires before, says the ending is inevitable. The only variable is how fast it happens and how painful it is. If this gave you a new perspective, subscribe. Because when the pattern completes, you'll want to understand what happened and why. History has the answers, and the pattern never lies.